Welcome, and in today's video we're talking about tattoo needle depth. How deep should you be going into the skin when performing a tattoo? I'm going to tell you where the sweet spot in the skin is, how to get there, and how I get my needles and ink into that sweet spot of the skin. Remember, keep around to the end because all these things come together to create the perfect needle depth for you. So if you're interested in that stuff, guys, let's go. Alright guys, we're going to start off by talking about the skin. Understanding needle depth, you have to understand where you're trying to get the ink into the skin. Yes, you need to set your depth various, we'll get into that in a little bit. But first off, you need to understand where your ink is trying to get to in the skin. Your first layer of skin is your epidermis. And your third layer is your hypodermis. What we're shooting for, the dermis, this is where you want the ink to go. The epidermis layer is shedding skin cells constantly. So we don't want our tattoo to be in this area. If our ink's in this area, then it's probably just gonna fall out when it heals up. Once that piece of skin heals up, it's going to push that out, it's going to fall off, it's going to flake out, blah blah blah. And that is why so many people are called scratchers, because they're scratching the skin right here. Okay, they're scratching, their needles are going in and they're getting a weak line, and even after it heals, it's probably going to fall out anyhow. So that's that whole scratcher idea. So what we're trying to do is get our ink in this area right here. A certain part of your line might look light if you're tattooing, going along, and slowly, then all of a sudden you just don't go as deep, and that's going to make for a missing component here. On the skin, you might see this line look like this, come across, get really light there, and darken back up. This might be gray in this portion right here. Either way, it's not quite saturated. So getting to that dermis is extremely important. Now, the hypodermis, you don't want to be there either. If you're in the hypodermis, that ink's going to hit and kind of spool out. It doesn't have the structure to hold the ink. And that is why you'll get a blowout. That's why the ink kind of just spreads out underneath. And as you can see in this picture as well, this portion right here is our dermis. The dermis also contains nerves, nerve endings, blood cells, and as you can see, hair. So this is all coming from that structured dermis area, and that's also why you will get some bleeding, and also you have nerves there, so this is why things hurt and you get blood. Below the dermis, again, is that hypodermis area. This is essentially just fat tissue. And again, you don't want to be in there because that's when things start to look bad. So, all this to tell you that there is a sweet spot, and it's called the dermis. And getting that ink into that specific spot is the most important thing. That's going to tell your needle depth. What do I have to do to get to that spot? We're going to talk some more about it, but I wanted to at least make sure everybody understood the 3 layers of skin and where you're ultimately trying to get that ink. Now that you know where the sweet spot is in the skin, now it comes down to how do you get your ink there. There are 3 factors that will determine whether you make it there or not. These are just the 3 main factors. 1, how far your needles are coming out of your tube. And I'm referring to when your machine is running. How much needle is coming out of that tube when your machine is running. Factor number 2 you need to understand is the voltage or power that you're running at. I'm referring to a rotary machine here, so we're going to be talking about the speed. That's your voltage, how fast you have that machine going compared to how much needle you have coming out of that machine when it's running. And these 2 factors play heavily into the 3rd factor, which is hand speed. How fast is your hand moving? If you have too much needle being thrown out and you're moving your hand way too slow and your voltage is set really high, you're going to eat skin up. So it's very important that you get these 3 right. So let's go over the first step, and that is how much needle should be coming out of your tube. This is specific to each person, so you need to kind of figure yours out. I can give you my recommendations where I start at, where I move from. That way, if you're totally lost and you're running something similar to mine as far as the setup goes, then at least that way you know where to start. So let me show you that real quick. I usually throw my needles out about this far when I'm starting. If you can see the tip of that tube, you'll see that my needles aren't hanging out too far. But as I tattoo, I might realize I need a little bit more. So I might turn this a little bit more and throw my needles out a little bit further. It just depends on what the skin is telling me. So that's how far my needle is coming out of the tube when I'm starting. And again, you're gonna adjust it as you go for each individual person, but it's a nice reference to start at for me. The next thing you have to figure out is the voltage at which you wanna run that machine. Well, that can be kind of tricky too. Again, it takes practice to figure these things out. There is no one answer. However, I will help guide you there. So what voltage are you going to start at? It's going to depend on what kind of machine you have. A lot of factors go into that, but nonetheless, I will show you what I run at when I'm starting out. Again, the voltage might go up, might go down as I start working on that tattoo, depending on the client's skin and other various factors. I like to run right around 8.1 volts. Sometimes I'll start off a little bit lower, maybe even at 7.5 volts, just depends on what I'm doing. And as I pull a few lines and start moving around, I will make adjustments, maybe a little bit more voltage. Or maybe I feel like the voltage is good, but the needle needs to just come out a little bit further to hit that dermis, get right in that sweet spot. The third factor, and it's just as important as every other factor here, how fast your hand moves, your hand speed. If you're running this setup that I have right here, but you're starting here and you're running at this speed right here, you're moving this fast with the setup that I currently have, your line is gonna not be in the skin. It's gonna look like crap. It's gonna look super scratchy. I don't move my hand this fast. It just depends on what I'm doing. A lot of times my hand is probably moving about this pace right here. But this is all going to depend on you and what you're comfortable with. Those are the three main factors. However, there's a couple other things that play a big part in this as well. The other one would be stretching the skin. If you think of it like a balloon, if a balloon is filled up to its capacity and you touch that needle to the balloon, it's going to pop. Now, if that same balloon was filled up and didn't have nearly as much air in it, it might take a little bit of a quick force, a quick punch with the needle to make it pop. That's essentially the same way the skin works. So the tighter you make that skin, the easier the needles are going to penetrate. The other thing to think about as well is the angle at which your machine is at. If you're tattooing straight up and down like this, well, you have all those needles, you're grouping like this, just pushing into the skin, and your skin's pushing back. If you have a little bit of an angle on that, when it goes in, it won't be all those needles hitting at once. It'll come in at an angle and help it glide into the skin and out of the skin a lot smoother, causing less trauma. So the angle of your machine makes a big difference when it comes to putting in a solid line. If it's a nice angle and you can come in at this angle right here, that's going to be your best bet. However it is you run this is totally up to you. But that nice angle is going to allow the needles to penetrate through the skin much better. These are the three key factors that are going to ensure that you can get your needles and your ink successfully to the dermis every time. There is no correct answer. However, that's why I wanted to also include the things that I do as well. That way, if you're completely lost, then you can match your equipment somewhat to mine and just do what I'm telling you. Even if you start tattooing the same way that I do now, you will still change your style as time goes on. You are going to find things that work best for you. There's no real way to look at those needles all the time. There's no way to know exactly how far that needle is in the skin every single time. That's why it's also important to get used to using that stretching hand we talked about before. You're going to feel those vibrations. At first, you're not really going to know exactly what you're feeling for. But as time goes on, you will start to understand, like, I can tell I'm in the sweet spot because the vibration is just right in my stretching hand. It's still one of the very difficult things to learn in the beginning. But keep that in mind as you're going forward. As you're trying to do all these other things, your stretching hand is one of your key sensors for whether you're in the right spot or not. So learn to listen to your stretching hand. Let's combine all this together, and I'm going to show you how to run a couple of lines and I'm going to use my leg as a demonstration for it. And you're also going to get this chance to see some of my very early work. So let's do that. Okay guys, here's the leg. As you can see, there's plenty of marks already on here. Back when I was practicing how to do lines, just running non-stop, I went ahead and already tattooed 2 lines just to show you the proper depth, the proper movement, the proper voltage, all combined into one. And then I quickly showed you another line where I moved much faster than normal, and you can see that the line is a bit thinner. I'm gonna do my best to show you the 3 factors that we talked about, all wrapped up into these 3 little lines. So let's go. This is a nice smooth ran line at a nice controlled speed. This is a much quicker pulled line. As this heals, this section over here will more than likely not get fully saturated in there and may fall out. So as you can see at the end there were 2 solid lines. I tattooed them just the way I would tattoo any other 2 lines. And then that 3rd line, I just moved quite a bit quicker, and you could see that it was a bit thinner, lighter. It wasn't what I wanted. But I hope this answered some of your question about how deep the needles have to go into the skin. They have to hit the dermis. When you learn to combine those 3 factors together, you're gonna have no problem with your needle depth. So if you enjoyed this video or learned anything, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell if you want to get notifications when I post. Until next time, guys.